Enrich, which is in Yogakshema, we talk about how can we add value to ourselves by having a much more fulfilling and enriching and satisfying life. And in Enrich, it's really about, if you're on a scale of 0 to 10 or a fulfillment scale, call it what you may. So taking it from the 3 to the 7.5 kind of a number is what Enrich is all about. And then the 7.5 to 9.5 takes a lot of time, and it's a different kind of struggle that is called that's the next module, which is Excel, which is what we are launching today, which will take us from the 7.5 to a 9.25, so to speak. And then the 9.25 to a 10 is a lifelong journey, which is the part which we are calling as embody. That's something. Right. So today will be a recap. I'll just share my screen and get started. So so in all sessions, we would like each one of us to at least, so right today itself, if you can go back after listening to today's program, if you can go back and write a short paragraph like a case, each one of you, just one case is good enough. If you can just write it and send it to us, then we can take one case each of the sessions, and thereby we can make it a lot more practical and meaningful. This program is primarily for people who are having leadership positions. They could be head of primary school, head of secondary school, head of a whole school. It's primarily for that. So we obviously and automatically assume a certain level of both experience and maturity in all the people. So we will be taking it at a level which is a notch higher than how we will do it if you are young teachers. Okay, so those are a few bits as far as the back. So today there won't be any case, and most of it will just be me talking, and I will probably take the next 60 minutes, I think, maybe 55 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A right at the end. Okay, the program we are launching is Teachers as Neurosculptors. We'll come to what neurosculpting is, and the Excel session number 1. Now, when we hear the word Excel, more often than not, it kind of gets us a feeling that that's something we are born with. Talent, excellence, leadership, a lot of things are things which we are born with, is the kind of connotation we have. And therefore, if we are not able to do something, we normally go back and say it is in my genes, or this is the way I'm born, this is the way I am, and so on. So we wanted one, which is, this is what Aristotle said about excellence. We are simply what we repeatedly do. And excellence, therefore, is not an act, it's not a trait, it's a habit. So in the next 12 sessions, we will try and see what are all the things where we will try and develop that habit of excellence. What do we need to get aware of so that we are able to pursue. Today, like we said, is a recap of what we did in the Enrich program. Now, if we ask ourselves, what is quality of life? What gives us joy? What gives us happiness? What gives us fulfillment? Then we will say many things. One of them could be that if I appear for an examination and pass that, of course it does. What about going up the ladder in an organization? Of course it does. Or a pay jump, or a holiday, or having lots of money to shop, build a house, have a car, or in general, having plenty of resources to work with. Now, all of this leads to a higher quality of life. Make no mistake. So people, house, people who have a roof over their head, people who get 3 square meals are happier, and they have a better quality of life than people who don't. The only trouble with an external quality of life is it is habituating. What that means is if we have some, we will want more of that, a higher dosage, if you may, of that particular thing to stay waiting, and you need a larger and larger dose of it to stay at the same pace. So if we get a pay jump of 10%, next year we want 12, the third year we want a 15 and 17. Nothing wrong with that, but that's how it works. Okay, it habituates and you need a larger dosage. But when it comes to the internal quality of life, words can't describe it very well, but we will still try and put a few words and say it's the deeper sense of so on, that just the sheer energy and optimism which we have is what we are calling as the internal quality of life. That sense of wellness which we have in us is what internal quality of life is all about. So for us to be able to perform effectively, we need both. We need the external conditions to be satisfied, and we also need the internal conditions. Otherwise, we are just in the external conditions where we are in a rat race, where we are going a leadership position, and then we come back and say, I don't seem to feel too good about all of these things. I'm not yet at a place. There is that search which goes on. Or you might be having that internal conditions, but the external conditions might keep us from pursuing some of these things further and further. Now, for us to be able to function externally, as well as for good internal functioning, we need both those conditions. What is external functioning? It's various roles where we come in touch with the rest of the society around us, whether it's as a professional or interpersonal relationship, and the kind of compassion and empathy we have when we come into interactions with people. An internal functioning is really about that sense of peace, joy, optimism, vitality, energy, and so on. The question is this. Now, all of what each one of us know that it is a good idea to be optimistic, to be fulfilled, to be happy, to have energy and vitality. But why is it so difficult to achieve a higher quality of life, a higher internal quality of life? Now, this is how life happens, doesn't it? First, we get started, we learn, we become knowledgeable on something, we go and work, we gain experience, and in the process, we also lock ourselves in a lot of preset mental processes and patterns. We overdefine right, wrong, good, bad, acceptable, unacceptable, okay, not okay. And we have so many different wrong, what is, a whole bunch of things. We'll come to each one of those things. Now, these set of beliefs and mental processes harden over a period of time. And as they harden, the mind becomes a slave and it imprisons itself within those hard parameters we set for ourselves. If we tell ourselves very strongly that I'm not good in something, all I have to do is I have a few times and it becomes a fact for us. And therefore, we can't do that at all because we told ourselves. Now, these kinds of biases and mental processes and patterns is what imprisons us. And we get into a place where we just survive. We wake up, we do a set of chores, we go to work, we do that job, what has to be done, come back home, do our job, watch television or whatever it is, we are dead again. And sometimes, as a part of survival, is also thriving. We could be thriving, we could be doing exceptionally well as a professional, but there is something which is missing. right? So the mind really gets imprisoned into the whole thing. In Enrich, we try to break all of this and say, what is that which is imprisoning us? What is that that is not helping us in our journey to starting with leadership? We talked about various neuroscience concepts. We took some time to understand what is the brain, what is mind, neuroplasticity and neurosculpting, belief systems, and so on. And then we went into saying, if I have to do things as well as I can, how do I find my purpose? How do I find my flow, time management, stress management? Then about interpersonal relationship, which was critical thinking, trust, empathy, teamwork, and communication. Now, for some of us who have not didactics, Rakal or Mary would have shared it with you. There are 12 pieces of didactic of about 25, 30 minutes each. It will be quite helpful. There is one on each of these 12 subtopics. A couple of chat messages. Let me check if any of them is. Okay. So we started the whole program talking about is not a position, it is not a power game, it is not sitting on top and giving directions. It is about setting vision, it is about an ability to motivate teams, it's an ability to align teams and to be able to communicate our vision and go through that particular journey to achieve that purpose, whatever we set out for ourselves. And therefore, leaders are far from being rigid. They're extremely flexible, extremely empowering people. And we talked about three types of flexibility. The first, cognitively, we are flexible. Second, emotionally. And third, dispositionally. What do we mean by that? The first part is about setting a vision, which is, can we imagine a clear future as to where do we want to go? If I'm the head of a school, where do I want to be? As in my school, where do I want? That is setting a vision. It's not a goal, it's a little more than that. The reason is a vision has to be necessarily a stretched vision. If you can easily hit a particular goal, it's usually a lousy goal. So we want to have goals or vision which have only a 30 to 40% chance of success. Third, we want to know if this is where I am and the point of arrival, how do I go from my point of departure to my point of arrival? The how defines what is my strategy. Right? So it's good to have, where am I? Where do I want to go? Where do I want to go is a good, solid stretch target, and I have a clear idea of how to go. But I can't journey alone. So therefore, it comes to our emotional flexibility, listening and empathy, so that we are able to bring about the alignment. If we do it with force, it will happen, but to some level only. But if you're able to generate a certain level of energy in our team, where the rest of the team feels equally passionate about that particular vision as you are, then you don't have a job of selling the vision anymore. Otherwise, we have to keep selling the idea of where we want to go. And the third one is optimistic manner with full of energy. Okay. Life is not worth it if you're not able to do something joyously with a lot of energy. No task is really worth it if you can't do it happily, joyously, and properly led by example by a leader. Okay. Those are the three elements when it comes to flexible leadership. Then we took a full detour and we said concepts for us. We asked a few questions on WhatsApp right in the beginning, which said, we use only a fraction of our brains. Is it true or false? Male brains are biologically better suited for math and science, female brains for empathy. Adults can grow new brain cells. There are people who are left-brained and right-brained, and all our brains are formed by the age of 12 or 14, and it doesn't grow after that. We ask these 5 questions. Every one of these questions is false. Okay, that's a very, very good, positive state to be in, because now we know that we don't have the excuse of saying, I'm a man and therefore I can do this, but I can't empathize, I can't be compassionate, or I can't say, I can't do this because I'm a woman, or I'm too old and therefore I can't be growing my brain. Which brings us to probably one of the most empowering concepts, a concept which is founded in science called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is something where our brain physically changes. It is like plastic, and it physically changes, the brain changes when we do certain things. What is that? When we change our thoughts, it's not metaphorically. It is not an example. It is not like, it is actually the brain changes. When we deeply think, then new neural connections are formed, and it actually literally changes the brain. When we change our feelings, our brain changes. And most importantly, when we change our actions, when we change our behavior, our brain changes. Thinking something differently from our old patterns, feeling differently from our old patterns, and behaving differently from our old patterns, we can change our brain and form new neural connections. And the new brain is something which we have. And this process in Yogakshema is what we call as the process of evolving. Now, if you look at a brain, there are 2 parts to our brain. Our brain, because it increases our sense of self-awareness. If you look at our brain, there are 2 parts to our brain. There are many, many parts to our brain. We're just going to broadly break it up into 2 parts and say there is one which is our higher center, or the more deliberate, conscious part. Okay, the higher center, or in terms of mind, it is the more conscious and willful mind. And then we have what is called a lower center, which we happen to share with the habitual mind, the part which is quite automatic. The lower center is very, very important, okay, because that is the seat of our emotions. That is the seat of a lot of automatic activities which is required to make us live, which is required for our survival. But if the lower center is very, very active and the higher center is not active, then we are always in an autopilot, which means we are just surviving. When we start using our higher center, and how do we use the higher center? We'll talk about some of those things. When we start using the higher center is where we are able to go and observe what is going on in the lower center, and then do all those 3 things of changing our thoughts, changing our feelings, and changing our action and behavior. So that's really what this whole journey is all about. Whether you call separations we have made for easy communication, but end of the day, this is all that we are after. What we are after is how do we make our higher center more active and the lower center less active. And that process is what we call neurosculpting. Neurosculpting is nothing but using a very powerful mechanism called neuroplasticity to slowly, by embarking on the journey of evolving from the current me to a more fulfilled and a more purposeful me. Okay. And yeah, if I'm sounding like Nityananda right here, I'll move to the next slide. Okay, what are those parts? What are those things which we talked about as things which imprison us, as things which keep us in preset patterns? One of them is what is value? Value is what is important to me. Okay. We are only going to do one slide. This is a 30-minute presentation. We'll end up doing one or two slides. So please go back to the didactic if you want a detail about it or a greater understanding of it. So value is what I think is important. Belief is what I think to be right. My sense of what is right and wrong might not be somebody else's idea of what is right and wrong. There are no absolute truths when it comes to beliefs and not even in values. And the third is morals, what I believe is right. Okay, sorry, belief is what I take to be true, and morals is what I believe to be right, and attitude is how I behave. So when it comes to values, beliefs, morals, and attitudes, none of them is universal. Very extreme ones and saying it's a good idea to be reasonably honest. It's a good idea not to kill other fellow human beings, and so on. There could be a few which are universal, but most values, beliefs, morals, and attitudes are not universal. What is the right values, beliefs, morals, and attitude? We don't really need to know that, but just the understanding that it is not universal, and therefore my values, beliefs, morals, and attitude could be very different from your values, beliefs, morals, and attitudes. And each of these things are shaped by the kind of family we are born in, the kind of society which is around us. So socio-economic, emotional, and educational conditioning and the experiences we go through in life will shape how our values, beliefs, morals, and attitudes get shaped. And what we will find is a lot of the dissonance. Okay, a lot of times when we have a disagreement with somebody else, it is because we come from a different VBMA as compared to somebody else. And we think this, what we have is the right one, and what somebody else has is not the right one. That's where the trouble starts. If you just recognize that mine and the others can be quite different, just that recognition. I don't have to change. I don't have to ask the other person. Your recognition that my values, beliefs, morals, and attitudes can be quite different from somebody else's values, beliefs, morals, and attitude itself has a very profound change in terms of the way we accept somebody and the way we become less and less judgmental about somebody. Expectations reduce and the focus turns towards ourselves in terms of saying, what can I? Now comes the big question, saying that, okay, it creates greater acceptance. Does that mean anything and everything I see out there, do I accept and expect nothing? Or, of course, not at all. Nobody says that. Okay. What we say is there are certain things which I need to accept. There are certain things I need to act on. I need to know what is the difference between the two. And that's where the serenity prayer comes in very, very useful. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The third part is critical, the wisdom to know the difference between the two in terms of what is that I can change and what is that I cannot change. So the entire focus of Yogakshema, therefore, is not so much about how can I change my spouse, how can I change my subordinates, how can I change my supervisors, how can it is entirely what is that I can do on myself? How can I change myself to make my life more happy, fulfilling, optimistic, energetic, and vitality and everything else? So Yumikshima's core focus, as you can see from the logo itself, is pain is inevitable, suffering is a choice. So we have to understand which part of optional. Where is that I need to accept, and what is that I need to act on? Where is that I need to be serene, and where is that I need the courage? There we put down and say, okay, the inevitable, the acceptance, serenity is one side. The optional, action and courage is another side. And what divides the two is really the line of wisdom, the wisdom to know the difference between the two. Is to try and move it more and more right, that we can act on things and not sit back and accept things which are happening, and to try and act on things which we can change. Sometimes we can't change it entirely, we can influence. We should take that opportunity to try and influence that as well. When it comes to active lower center, an active lower center is having unpleasant memories, bad experiences, anxiety, and so on. Have the courage which is lacking, we procrastinate, we can be lazy, and poor time management. All of this messes up with our action and acceptance choices. So what we want, like we said a couple of slides back, is what we want is a less active lower center and a more active higher center. Again, it's important to know in terms of acting, that is not courage, that is recklessness. And similarly, acceptance comes from wisdom. So we can't accept everything. Otherwise, it becomes either chalta hai or it becomes avoidance. Where we can act, we need to act. Where we cannot act and we can't influence it, we need to accept. And that's our line of wisdom. So it's all about figuring out that line of wisdom. And usually it's a good idea to make an error in the direction of action, which is act on things which you think you might have to accept, but still go ahead and act it if you're slightly confused. Okay, because acceptance is a bit of status quo-ish kind of a thing, and action requires us to move. And as humans, we have a tendency to sit in status quo and therefore go with action and make error on the action side, not so much on the acceptance side. As values, beliefs, morals, attitudes, and where do we accept and where do we act? Then an important neuroscience concept is what is reality, what is sensing and perception. Now, there is a certain reality which is out here. I've just drawn a picture and that's our reality. And this reality has to go through our mind. It goes through, first of all, our five senses. We either see that reality, hear the reality, any of those things. It has to come through the five senses. Once the information, that reality comes through one of the five senses or sometimes through multiple senses, then it has to be processed. And when it gets processed through a mind which already has hard values, beliefs, morals, and ethics. And therefore, it will only get processed based on our past experiences. Perception. And that perception from one person's point of view might look like a 6, and somebody else's point of view, it might look like a 9. And you can't say who's right and who's wrong. It's just that how they sensed it, how they saw it, how they processed it. And that is what perception is all about. Now, what are the filters which mask our perception? Values, beliefs, morals, ethics. And in Excel, mindset, biases, And we'll spend a bit more time on more than automatic negative thoughts. We'll spend some time on resilience, right? So these are some of the things we will talk about. And these are some of the filters which mask our perception. And therefore, perception cycle somewhat works like this, which is we see a reality and we perceive that reality and we take the reality to be can only perceive. Okay, we can only take a filtered view based on how our mind is processing. We take a filtered view of what the reality out there is, and that this is very important. That we need to understand is my truth. It is not the truth. It is my truth. And therefore, if somebody else sees that reality and forms a different opinion or an impression about it, that's perfectly fine. We cannot insist, no, this is what it is. And we are not talking about something like, what color is this bottle? Everybody will say it's a light blue color. That's not what we are talking about. We are talking about a reality a bit more complex than that. And when we perceive, we have to understand what we come to is my truth. Somewhere in our brain, we conflate it and convert that into a fact, which is where the real difficulty comes. It's And then I go through that particular experience thinking it's a fact and store it away in my memory, which now shapes the way I take the new reality. So, unless I'm able to break the cycle, I will be constantly in this perception cycle of continuously hardening the same wiring which is there, and therefore it will keep me in the survival loop. So, there are two ways to break the perception cycle, which is the first fully. When we talk about reality and perception, Wayne Dyer, this is a wonderfully powerful statement which says, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at will change. Okay. It's just a way in which we reorient ourselves when we see a certain reality. If we have somebody or some culture with whom we have had a bad experience in the past, if we are able to reorient it and look at it with a fresh pair of eyes, truly with a fresh mind, then the reality we will see is different from our earlier preset belief. If we change the way we look at things, then the things we look at will change. There are a few tricks you can use, which is like rather than saying somebody is unreasonable, we can say what is making us or the others and say, there is something which is going on. We do that with children all the time. You seem upset, what's going on? But we somehow don't think that happens when it comes to adults. This kid is never attentive in class. Instead, if you ask the question, why is the child sleeping? Is the child sleeping very late? Maybe it's the child is working very hard, helping out the mother, grandmother, parent, grandfather, whoever it is. They're sleeping very late, that girl or boy. Rather than saying a child acceptance, which we are not having, or is it love which the child is not having, to kind of start changing our perception and say from that person's point of view, and also with an open mind, rather than compartmentalizing and blocking it and saying this is what it is, this is a bully, this kind of a child, my management is a bunch of idiots. Rather than that kind of an attitude, to try and see what is making them that. So changing perception is really about developing a way of thinking. Then we spoke about automatic negative thoughts. Ants. Ants are essentially involuntary negative thoughts. Apparently, we get about 65, 70,000 thoughts in a day, and a large part of them are negative thoughts. Not just that, a large part of them are repetitive negative thoughts. It's the same thought, which is these ants, if you get a negative thought and they start looping in our head, we allow them to breed. Once we allow them to breed, thoughts get converted into feelings. Because with every thought, there is a small amount of a negative chemical which is secreted. Okay, a small neurotransmitter, a small amount of negative chemical is secreted. We don't want to go into the names of the negative chemicals, but there are negative chemicals which are secreted in our brain. And these, when we loop and keep going through that same negative thought again and again and again, then they can start moving through our bloodstream and they become negative feelings. Feelings then stay in our body for a very long period of time. There are times when we come back and say, I don't feel, good at all. I don't really know why, because the thought is gone, but the feeling is still in our body. Remember, our thoughts and feelings shape our personality, and therefore it is very important to understand what these negative thoughts are, what are the different types of negative thoughts which is there in the didactic, and what can we do to address each of those negative thoughts. But just to take two examples of two very, very important ants, both of them are two sides of the same coin. One is blaming, which is looking outside for a reason to explain things. The other one is when we are faced with a difficult situation or a failure or a mistake, then we find it difficult to take accountability or ownership of it. And that's defending. All right. So blaming and defending are the two big ants. And if we allow ants to breed, if we allow those 70,000 thoughts, a large part of them being negative thoughts, to keep on looping in our head, then our past will be full of regrets and lost opportunities. I should have done that. I always will be going on, and our current will be unsatisfactory and inadequate, and say, I'm okay, I'm going on, and how's life? Yeah, going on, kind of a thing. It's just going on. And our future is full of anxiety and pessimism. All right. Couple of very, very good news is most ants are false. And you get an ant, write it down, and you will realize many times a false ant doesn't mean that the chemical was not secreted. The thought was a real thought. If I believe that somebody is going to shortchange me and the person has got bad intent, the negative chemical is secreted. And that person turns out to be a perfectly fine individual, doesn't mean that chemical can be taken back. It's already secreted. So whether the actual thought was true or thought, and once the thought is real, all thoughts are real, but they might be true, they might be false. And the second thing is you have the power to change. We'll come to the various powers. So in summary, reality is not the same for everyone. It comes through a sensory input, through the perceptions, automatic negative thoughts and belief systems. And what we see is our reality. That's all we need to understand here, saying that whatever reality I see is my. Why? Because I'm sending it through my values, beliefs, morals, and attitudes, and ethics also. So somebody else might perceive it quite differently. Then we went on to three important aspects on self-empowerment. I could take a question or two right here on these neuroscience concepts, particularly from people who have not been a part of Enrich. It might sort of help it. So, yeah. Any questions at all? Yes, Shilpi.
So when we look at acceptance, what is acceptance based on? I mean, is it also connected to our, won't it be connected to our values and, whatever morals or attitude do I run my life with, or, whatever is already structured, because it is cemented in a way relative to that?
Yes, it is. But the only word I will probably object to is my values, beliefs, morals, and attitudes and ethics are not cemented. They're formed, but they can be reshaped. They can be remolded. That is what neuroplasticity is all about. So our from that as well, understand, accept will come through that, which is what wisdom is all about. And the way we get them is not just by going through life, it's by evolving life. That line is what determines actions on and what is my acceptance on.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. I don't know. I have two questions, in fact. One is that all humans have. That is point number one. And the second one is the chemical when it is released. How can we actually dilute it? Because you mentioned it cannot be taken back. So how can that be diluted or taken away from the system?
Okay, Aditi, if I may answer by the time Ramesh comes back, let me answer Lakshmi's questions. The first question is about the chemical is already secreted. That it is a negative thought, try and replace with a positive thought with much more intensity than the negative one. That is the way. That you can replace a negative thought with a positive thought. That is easiest way to do. And the second question you talked about, the second question you asked was, what was it?
Defending and
defending. Yes, it is innate. You're absolutely right. It is innate. That doesn't mean it is helping us. Just because it is automatic, it is natural, it's innate. There are many of such things that actually pull us down, that won't help us out. So one of the reasons both defend, many times we don't recognize, it is others who recognize that. Like, for example, a student will never think that it is giving it anything as an excuse, right? It is defending, but we realize. So it is the same thing for us. As long as we become self-aware of our own thought patterns, then we'll be able to change. Because blaming and defending, we will never ever be able to defending thoughts. That is the foundation, and the reason to be able to change a blaming thought or a defending thought is that, because we will never be able to learn. But our self-awareness has to be heightened, so that we will be able to recognize that we are blaming either the situation or the person or defending ourselves. As long as we recognize that and change, that is what it is. Yes, it is innate because it is coming from the lower center of the brain. It is automatic. So for all of this, what I said, even self-awareness comes from the willful mind or from the higher center of the brain. Consciously, willfully, we need to be able to change that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Auntie. Which is in terms of self-empowerment and in terms of interpersonal relationship, we had about 6 or 7 didactics around it. And these are some of the main topics we talked about. One was by a positive psychologist by name Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which is this concept of flow. Flow is essentially, we put the two things, which is our ability and the level of challenge on the two axes, and say that if my ability is low and the kind of opportunity, the challenge, the difficulty of a certain problem doesn't energize me, and therefore it's a low challenge and a low ability, it leads to a place which is called apathy, which is the bottom left. And as I take up the level of challenge, while I don't have the competence, it goes from apathy to worrying to anxiety. On the other side, if I don't move my challenge, if I keep my challenge levels very low, so to speak, doing a 1-star Sudoku, it will start from apathy to boredom to relaxation. I mean, a 1-star Sudoku, right? We want the 5-star and we want to be doing that. Now, the 3 other places are important, which is where our ability is moderate and the challenge is high, and where our challenge is moderate and the ability is high, and finally where both of them are very high. And that's a place where it's called the flow. A flow is a genuinely satisfying experience. Focus, we don't even realize that time flows. We've all experienced it. It's about trying to get that state more often during every living moment of our lives. Which brought us to this concept where it's more a structuring of the whole thing, which is this concept called Ikigai. Ikigai is what you're good at, what is that you love, and what will pay either tangibly or intangibly. And bringing all the 4 together will get us to a place called Ikigai, which is there is an activity where I'm doing it because I love it, I'm very good at it, and it's something the world needs. And I also get that satisfaction that I'm getting paid tangibly or intangibly for that. To where our Ikigai is, then naturally we will get closer and closer to a higher quality of internal quality of life. Second, we spoke a bit about zero waste about time management. We said we all talk about zero waste. We talk about reduce, refuse, reuse, and recycle, and so on. The one non-renewable resource we all have is our time. And therefore, it is not about time management. We made an argument saying it's not so much about scheduling and saying I'll do this at 9 o'clock and then at 9:15 I have this meeting and 9:45 I have this. That's fine. That's scheduling. It's also not about that ABCD thing. It's none of those things, but it's really about figuring out what is important to me. And only act on. Mahatma Gandhi very profoundly said, action expresses my priorities. And therefore, I don't have the choice of saying, I didn't have time. All we have to do is just reformulate it and say, it was not my priority. Whenever next time we feel like saying, I didn't have time to do that, we just have to say that it was not my priority to do that. It will make a very important change in our life when we start saying it that way. Was it my priority? Is it aligned to my goal? If it is not, if it is some other kind of an activity, refuse it. That's the key to time management. Time management is not so much about scheduling. It is about scheduling, but it's not primarily about scheduling. It is about getting the priority and the importance of things right. And that is where our whole thing of action and acceptance really comes in. So don't act on things which are low priority. And also, when you act, have a very clear idea in terms of, if don't measure with a vernier caliper, if you're going to mark with a chalk and cut with an axe. We have to be very clear in terms of what is the final thing. If you're going to cut with an axe, measuring with a vernier caliper was completely a waste of time. So it is those kinds of things, not trying to get 100% right on 100% of the things and 100% of the time. It's about getting that thing right in terms of what is the level of precision I need on certain things, and only going up to that level of precision or probably a tad more. So those were some of the things we talked about when it came to time management as a full 30-minute didactic, which came in one slide. Then stress. In stress, we said pressure is an external thing, whereas stress is how we take it. Pressure is something we all undergo. There is no way we can go through life without pressure situations. But whether it stresses us or not is a choice. So we have to again just say that I have so much stress. It's not that. Or, you can say there is pressure which is there, but I am taking so much stress. So accountable for it. You see, all along we'll just be saying the same thing in different ways. In one case, we will say, choose what you want to act on and refuse all else. Decide through your wisdom what is your action area and what is your acceptance area. When it comes to time management, we say, rather than saying I didn't have time to do that, just say it was not my priority to do that. When it comes to stress, rather than saying everything is stressing, you say that I am taking a lot of stress. So when we keep, don't blame or defend, just take accountability for it. Defending will go off. Don't look externally to try and blame, rather say, what else could I have done? So it's all about coming back and saying, what else could I have done? So really, pressure that way is inevitable, whereas stress is a choice. We choose to take stress. This is what in response, there's a tiny space. And that's where we choose our response. In that response lies our evolution, or that evolving, our growth and our freedom, right? Then we moved on to interpersonal relationship, where we talked about 3 topics. First of them being critical thinking. Why did we take something which is a very 1900s kind of an idea like critical thinking? Because this is how data, you make an analysis and then you come to a conclusion. Not anymore when we have WhatsApp. Not anymore. I'm not blaming WhatsApp. I'm blaming ourselves for that, for believing everything which is out there. So gone are the days then when we had to go to a library to go and find out what the data is, actually analyze it and come to a conclusion. Now the conclusion is there. All I have to say is this particular denomination or of a certain, or a problem case. It's a basket case. This political party is like that. People of this race are all like that. Women are all like this. Men are all like that. So we have the conclusion. All we have to do is create some kind of a structure by which we have to fit the data back in and say, this is what it is. So critical thinking is something we have to reclaim. Thinking. How do we reclaim it? First and foremost is skepticism, which is not taking everything at face value. It is not that we don't believe other people. It is having that healthy attitude of saying, first, I want to not believe, and then I want to hear all the explanations and then come to that place of belief. Second, news. Classes, I read somewhere which says, news is to your brain what sugar is to your body. No good. Okay, I'm not saying don't read anything. Of course, read very long articles, but just listening to news and headlines and all these shouting matches and breaking news or whatever it is just an addiction. Okay, it's exactly the same as having 4 spoonfuls of plain sugar. It does no good whatsoever. Bias in the 12 sessions. And don't be too eager to seek agency. This will take me a long time to explain this particular point, so I'm going to kind of pass and keep moving forward. And fifth is about eloquence. Very important. Eloquence moves us, and often we get moved by eloquence without realizing what exactly is the point the other person is trying to make. Some of these spiritual leaders take an A4 sheet of paper, sit down and write down what is the point they are making. You will realize after 1 hour of listening to somebody, you wouldn't have filled up even 4 lines. There wasn't much going on probably. Okay, it's just sheer eloquence. Very important. Being willing to change our beliefs. If we can't change our beliefs, our sense of morals, little we can do in terms of our action, acceptance, higher center, lower center, all of that starts from our values, beliefs, morals, and ethics. The last few slides, one is about trust. In just the last slide, we talked about skepticism, and we said, don't trust anything and everything you hear. And the next slide, we come and say, trust, the foundation of relationships. At all between the last slide and this one, but at the end of the slide, I'll talk about it. Trust is the #1 leadership competency, according to Stephen Covey, the guy who wrote, the person who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. What is trust? Trust is truly believing in people, which is about ceding control. There's not a lot more to trust than ceding control. If we cannot hand over a certain responsibility to someone and cede control completely, then wherever there is insecurity, wherever there is anxiety in terms of will it work out, will it not work out, will the person take it away, will the person do this, and there is anxiety and insecurity, then trust cannot form. And that's the foundational block for individuals to become teams. Parents of children as people who are annoying and keep coming back and asking all kinds of questions, or management. Instead, we build trust. Now, it is not a touchy-feely concept. Trust is something which can be built. It can be built incrementally, and there are some ways in which we can build trust. Now, how do we reconcile the skepticism with trust? Okay, at least the way I reconciled it is I trust people, I mistrust ideas. I generally don't buy into ideas and theories and logics and hypotheses easily, but I generally buy into the goodness in people. I truly believe there is goodness in people, but human beings are genuinely good people, but we are probably not all that good with our ideas, and therefore it has to be subjected to a great degree of skepticism, and we have to go through that. If we trust people and only mistrust ideas, it will get into a healthy conversation situations where we can just argue out the point on a substrate which is on trust. So some of the foundational blocks of trust are talking straight, having a true sense of empathy, transparency, and taking on accountability. Very important leadership skill. When things go wrong, stand up and say, I screwed it up. Okay, don't bother, don't caveat it. I go and say that I screwed it up, it didn't work out because of me. It's perfectly fine. So once you grant trust, you have to give it time to breathe. Okay. So it's like putting a seed inside. You can't pull the plant to see whether the root is growing. It doesn't work that way. Once you put the seed, you have to just water it and nurture it and wait for it to grow. Shoes of others, which is empathy. There are some general rules around empathy, which is relate to the story, don't try to solve the problem, don't answer any question which is being asked when a person is talking about a certain situation they are going through. Don't give solutions, just relate to the story and go through it as if you are going through it. And that's all that is there to empathy. Thing is about how do we respond when your child enthusiastically starts on a story. Now there's a full slide or 15 minutes we have spoken on that. I'm not going into that. And we are coming to the last couple of slides, which is really about three critical things, which is A, authenticity. Authenticity is just being ourselves. It should be very straightforward, but we will realize we are very different people with different people. Right? So with somebody else, we are lively. Somebody else, we are a lot more dictatorial. With somebody else, we are generally in a bad mood. With somebody else, we put them down. Somebody else, we suck up to them, and so on. So it calls for a deep sense of self-esteem. Okay, for us to be authentic, we have to. So if you're fearful, if you're second guessing and we are judging or feel judged, when we feel judged, usually we are also judging simultaneously. Okay, those are all things which lose authenticity. So the three elements are really about the critical thinking, the empathy, and the authenticity. If you're able to combine those three, being ourselves, having the ability to put ourselves in the shoes of others, and having a good, strong, compelling logic when we present a certain point, that is what leads to better leadership, better alignment, and therefore it increases our chances of going towards our goals along with our teams. Individuals. I always use the New Zealand cricket team, which, by the way, won the World Test Championship, and I'm extremely happy about it, even though they beat India, which I didn't like too much. A good team is where the whole is greater than the sum of the individuals. If a certain individual is the dominant force in a team and a prime mover in a particular team, then the team is not working. If we are the principal, if you are the head of school, if the prime head of a few things are moving, then it is not something to be proud of. It just means we have not been able to build a proper team which is able to move on its own. Teams have to have a common purpose, a common set of values, and it has to have tremendous trust which is embedded within it. Where anybody falls at any point in time, the others are able to quickly lift them up, rather than, which is where trust comes in. Fun. Okay. And yeah, that's about it. I will share these slides. I don't want to, this will go on. There are a few points in terms of antidotes and tools. We will anyway share this presentation. I will just go through these, and I'm not going to go into every little detail in terms of antidotes and tools. We talked about all of this. But at least these 5, let's practice it. Keep our physical activity fairly high, whether it's walking, running, whatever, skipping, playing tennis, swimming. Get our nutrition right. a solid sleep hygiene in terms of having good quality sleep and a good quantity sleep. Keep laughter in an authentic way, not laughing at everything, in an authentic way. Keep laughter and joy and optimism and energy. And right, so this is where we started, saying we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act but a habit. And our job in the next 12 weeks, 12 sessions, is to really go through that. Okay, how do we develop that particular habit? So the things we are going to talk about, we'll have 4 sessions on neuroscience. We'll talk about mindset in the next session, followed by cognitive habits. 5th, we will talk about resilience and integrate all the items and tools. All of the things, we will tie it up together. Then we will have Anita. Anita was a part of our this particular program, Anita Rao. She will take up life position and strokes. Then we move into a bit. What is excellence? How do we pursue it? When we talk about things like strategy and structure, what is it? How do we, define roles, role boundaries? How do we develop a strategy? How do we pursue a strategy? When we talk about systems, what is a good system? Is information technology equal to a system? Is it something else? What are processes? Very important is shared values and culture. And finally, we'll have one more wrap on what exactly those 11 topics before that, and also a bit of what we did in Enrich. And that will be the last session, which will conclude on 4th of December, 2021. I really don't know when Diwali is. If it's on a Saturday, we will move that around. Otherwise, most of these dates are more or less cast in stone.